Y'all ever heard about hoarders? Those people who live in piles of their own filth. Those people who just straight up refuse to let go and wade through heaps of the same item. The kind of people who just melt into their own furniture. What if we made that into a game, but instead of collecting random junk and keeping it in your house, we turn it into one of the biggest FPS franchises in the world? That's probably what certified flash drive magician Randy Pitchford thought when he decided to write Borderlands. The first game to really cement the looter shooter genre, before it became a first-person World of Warcraft. I'm talking about you, Destiny 2. Borderlands is the kind of game that puts engagement over everything. But why is that? Well, it goes back to the original intention behind Borderlands. When coming up with the idea of Borderlands, there were two things on Randy Pitchford's mind. Those two things were role-playing games and first-person shooter. The concept of role-playing games being leveling up and playing towards the long term, building this character up and expanding their skills. Then, something Randy Pitchford has worked on himself, first-person shooters. Games like Duke Nukem 3D and the Half-Life expansions. Both of these games have different forms of engagement. For example, the RPG has players working towards a long-term goal. Like mentioned earlier, leveling up to become stronger, it's a time sink, but for a good reason, as by the end of the game, you're the hero, you're strong and capable. FPS games are different. In the old sense of FPS games, it's very linear. Take Half-Life for example. The game has a linear story. You complete interconnected levels and take on groups of enemies, clearing out rooms methodically, and sometimes you find a secret or two. The point is, you're playing for the short term. You're fighting small fights to make it to a single goal. There's no long-term reward aside from completing the story, if there even is one. However, even though these gameplay styles are different, Randy, and by extension Gearbox, saw that there was a way to mix the two, bring them together to create something different from other games. Thus, building Borderlands on the foundation of mixing general RPG mechanics with the fast-paced and engaging action of FPS titles. Pitched as Halo meets Diablo, the team started working on Borderlands, putting the game in space. Partway through development, Gearbox realized that their in-game look was too close to some other games, since Borderlands' world was more post-apocalyptic compared to normal space stories. Their original, more realistic art style was compared to other games that had released, like Fallout 3 and Rage. So they changed it, giving us the cel-shaded style the series is known for. And everyone loved it, except one person. The original art director, who was so distraught at the fact that all of their hard work was ruined that they left the company and quit the gaming industry forever. I'm not joking, look it up. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Borderlands, now on the market, puts players in the shoes of one of 4 Vault Hunters. Roland, a soldier, Lilith, a siren, Mordecai, a hunter, and Brick, a berserker. These 4 archetypes lean into the mix of RPG and FPS genres. Roland is a neutral soldier class, built more for those who are more in tune with the FPS genre than RPGs. Mordecai is a ranger, Lilith is a mix between mage and thief, and Brick is a barbarian class. While the setting remains on the fictional planet of Pandora, there's hints of RPG-styled fantasy storytelling in the game's world, with the main quest for the group being that they need to find multiple pieces of an artifact scattered around the world if they want to stake their claim to a long-lost treasure. I mean, come on, think about it. 4 heroes go to a mysterious world they've never been to find pieces of an ancient artifact which promises of treasure. As they're hunted down by multiple factions on their journey, look at the bandits for a moment. Every RPG has bandits, whether it's in the fantastical world of Elder Scrolls or the post-apocalypse of Fallout. Yes, I know they're made by the same company, but Borderlands even mixes these together, creating the Psycho Bandit, which also has become the face of Borderlands. They've almost reached minion status with how popular they are. I mean, they're in Fortnite for fuck's sake. Anyways, I'm getting off track. Sounds like a normal D&D campaign to me, but that's what makes it so good. Even though it's just a little bit generic, anyone who's gotten into RPGs can get into it, especially if they play with their friends. This is where Borderlands jumps into one of its biggest selling points: multiplayer. Multiplayer is probably one of the biggest saving graces for the game, being that while most RPG players would like to try a little FPS in their RPG, the concept of having an RPG in your FPS might scare away one of the largest audiences in gaming at the time. So, incorporating multiplayer and having people play with their friends hands one thing to players that they didn't think about to begin with: engagement through connection. Players experiencing the same story together is fun when it comes to co-op games, but driving engagement based on the connection you have with players, almost tricking them into working together while giving a completely different experience to each one of them, helps keep players engaged with the world. So, the normal FPS player who picked Roland and enjoys playing through the levels, gunning down enemies, is going to stick to the game as long as they're playing with their friend who's running the game as Lilith, helping them understand the way leveling and skill trees work. Plus, if you want to play with your friends, you need to buy multiple copies. But that's the nature of Borderlands, having different experiences in the same environments, especially with the insane and fast-paced world of Borderlands. This even works its way into the guns for the game as well, putting effects on weapons like healing bullets when you shoot teammates or elemental damage. Keeping an eye on the manufacturer of your weapon gives more insight into the Borderlands world and how that gun is going to work in the game. Just as a few examples, if you find a Jacob's weapon, you'll notice that they're never elemental. Instead, they're normal guns, but all Jacob's weapons have higher damage and a low reload speed. On the opposite side of the spectrum, you've got Maliwan, which only makes elemental weapons, but they've always got small benefits to recoil and reload speed. What does that tell you about the world? That there's an economy and a market, and the game doesn't explain this to you. You have to pick up on it yourself, like a D&D game. The guy running the campaign doesn't hold your hand while you play, and the choices you make are all yours. It's that further mix of engagement on both sections as well, with leveling up meaning you can work towards a powerful weapon you might have picked up earlier in the game, but can't use yet. It's a goal that benefits you in both the short and the long term. It keeps that engagement all the way through, like mentioned previously. See, I told you I was coming back to it. Also, adding to the engagement of the game is the open world the player interacts with. While the game has a linear story, taking the player places the world to explore is more than just that. And this ties into the mixture of RPG and FPS. RPGs have open worlds, since going places and experiencing the world is tantamount to that immersive experience. But Gearbox knows getting around is kind of annoying, especially for FPS players, who are people on a mission. So they've taken a piece from Halo's book and implemented vehicles for players to ride around in, but they're few and far between. So you'll still be forced to take on some enemies and possibly get some good loot in the process. Even more, this is where the wonderful term called looter shooter comes in. Part of the way Borderlands keeps this engagement is by having enemies drop items, similar to games like Diablo, where you get drops from enemies. This incentivizes you to seek out more powerful enemies, as they drop more powerful gear for you to use. Players can find what works for them and then pick it up to use on their own. Since there's so much of it, there's always something new to do. Even fighting enemies you see as you walk around the world will sometimes drop items that can upgrade your firepower. It takes that concept of short-term room clearing from FPS and integrates it with the long-term goal of RPGs, leveling up and getting stronger, keeping you not only on your toes, but keeping your eyes out for drops. It's an almost addictive feeling. And that's all thanks to the random gun generation system in the game. While some guns found on missions are special, most of the guns in the game are randomized, which is something taken from Diablo. Gearbox has made a system similar to Diablo's random item system, allowing for over 17 million weapon combinations, keeping players coming back for the possibility of a gun dropping that could maybe, I don't know, shoot rockets, or a revolver that shoots lasers, or a rifle that shoots shotgun shells. Guns are manufactured by a variety of in-universe companies, each with their own recognizable styles and designs. It adds further charm to the game and its world. Speaking of the world, let's talk a little bit about the story. We got a taste of it earlier, but you don't know the whole setup. So, in the far-off future, this planet, Pandora, was supposed to be this new planet rich with resources. But when all the mining companies got there to take advantage of this space-age gold rush, it was a huge lie. And all the companies that were mining there leave, except they don't take everything. They leave all their settlers and criminals they had working for them. And without anyone to uphold the law, the place becomes a Mad Max-esque world filled with violent crime and plenty of mayhem. However, as the planet warms up, monsters that were in hibernation come out of the woodwork, further adding to the mayhem. Although, one hope remains, a massive alien vault, rumored to hold massive amounts of alien tech and secrets. You being one of 4 vault hunters, who know of its existence, but not its location. Go to Pandora to solve the mystery of the vault, and either make it rich or die trying. Pandora is filled to the brim with all manner of characters. Look at this little guy right here. He's called Claptrap, and he's another mascot type character. There's not much to say about him, except that you'll see him a lot, and that you'll want to blow your brains out after listening to him speak for more than 3 nanoseconds. There's heaps of natural flora and fauna, each of which wants to bite a meaty chunk out of whatever appendage happens to be closest to their mouth, or mouths. Skags, rags, spider ants, cytids, they each have their own distinct, recognizable, and in some cases, iconic design. Then, every type of wildlife also has their own variations depending on how old the creature is and how high it is in the hierarchy. The first game alone has 8 different skag types, from pups and whelps to adult versions like spitters, elders, and the badass variations. Then we've got the bandits, the Crimson Lance, and other factions, all looking for a piece of this vault you're searching for. So, real quick, let me break down the story of Borderlands. The story starts off with our 4 vault hunters arriving to the small derelict town of Firestone, or just one of you if you don't have any friends. We're here in order to collect the pieces of the vault key in order to get our hands on the priceless hoard of loot inside. After talking to Claptrap, uploading a copy of our brain onto the new UNet, and clearing the town of its small bandit problem, we talk to Dr. Zed, a man who stands next to this one corpse for days on end. What the hell is he doing with that thing? Fortunately, Claptrap is then shot, but unfortunately we need to repair him in order to continue the story. After doing so, we kill some skags, repair a vending machine, and then meet TK Baha, a one-legged blind man. He tasks us to get him some food and to buy some grenades before then sending us to take out our first really big threat, 9 Toes. A man with 9 toes and 3 balls. That's canon, by the way. By this point, you should be pretty tired of having to walk everywhere. So we fixed the nearby cancerite system by taking out Bonehead, who is a bigger threat than 9 Toes, ironically. We then meet Shep Sanders and get started on the Sledge questline. He also holds on to the first piece of the vault key we require. It's here that the game really opens up with the amount of side quests it throws at you, allowing for you to explore more places, fight more enemies, and most importantly, collect more loot. First off, we head to Zephyr Station in order to get our hands on the key to Sledge's mine, whereafter the visually unimpaired amongst you might notice that my level has gone up a suspicious amount of times in one frame. This is because I got sidetracked with stopping a zombie apocalypse. For the sake of keeping the video in chronological order, we'll stick with the main story. We head to the mine and take out Sledge. Next up, we leave Firestone, trading the brown mud of the arid Badlands for the brown mud of the dull headlands. We get there, rescue Lucky, and boot up the fast travel network again, allowing us to skip over most of the boring driving segments. So we then kill some bandits, a lot of side hits, and then finally Mad Mel, a large fella who drives a large truck. You're supposed to take him on in one-on-one vehicle combat, but if you mess about for all of 2 seconds, you'll discover your regular person-sized guns are a lot more effective than the vehicle-mounted turrets. We then make our way to New Haven, the game's second main hub. This one is instantly a lot more expansive than Firestone, with there being heaps of vendors, tons of quests to find, and more than one NPC to talk to. We meet a quirky scientist lady who tells us Crazy Earl stole her piece of the vault key. We go to meet him and he gets mad at us because we don't have any iridium. We commit some domestic terrorism, do some pest control, and then kill a bunch of bandits for their booze, instead of buying it ourselves with the literally hundreds of thousands of dollars we currently possess. After all of that, Earl tells us that the piece he stole from Tanis was in turn stolen by an evil bandit named Crom. We go to Crom's canyon, fight our way through his crevasse, and then face off against Crom, who actually doesn't seem to be that bad of a guy, seeing as the first thing he does is shoot an unarmed Claptrap unit. Next up is the Janestown questline. I'd love to explain it to you, but honestly, it's so fucking boring, I'm just gonna do this. We then make it to the Trash Coast, which is a subtle nod to the writing in the 4th game. There, we take on the Rak Hive, a gigantic 4-legged creature home to, you guessed it, racks. It's one of the most boring fights in the game, since you don't need to actually enter the arena in order to take on this gigantic bullet sponge of an enemy. After defeating it, we get our hands on the 3rd piece of the vault key, swiftly moving on to the 4th piece, but not before rescuing our trustworthy Claptrap unit. Quite unfortunate. We make our way to the Salt Flats, where we climb up Baron Flint's fortress, taking out Hans and Franz before facing off against the Baron himself. We make our way to Flint's treasure trove, whereupon it's revealed that Tanis lied. Flint doesn't have a piece of the key at all. It's actually been in the ownership of none other than Steel, a commander of the Atlas Corporation. She's also been working with Tanis in secret in order to swoop in and steal the treasure right from under our noses. She also shuts down the Equinets, which wouldn't have happened if they had an active subscription too. I wasn't sponsored by any VPN brand for this video, but it definitely would have made for a clever transition, right? We then go to find Tanis, killing a whole army of Crimson Lands who scream uncomfortably loud when they die while going there. After finding her, she tasks us to find and reactivate the 3 transmitter consoles in order to find where Steel is hiding. It's during this part we also start running into large amounts of Guardians, ancient aliens hiding on Pandora in order to stop us commoners from accessing the vault and its treasure trove. They take like 4 mags of an assault rifle to take out, but they give you more XP than most of the quests in the game, so it's worth the monotonous repetition. About 20 minutes of Later, we make it to the vault, with Steel managing to beat us to the punch by only a few moments, whereupon it's revealed that the treasure the vault holds truly is priceless. Hentai. See, I told you guys it was all worth the wait. It is here that the old age of this game starts to show, as this might be the most boring, monotonous bullet sponge of an enemy in the game. He doesn't move and barely requires any skill to beat. You literally just stand there and shoot it in its big purple eye. Angel is revealed to be an AI, Claptrap turns evil, and then the credits roll. Banger tune that I can't let you guys listen to. The wonder of copyright infringement. Afterwards we go drop the vault key off at Tannis' place in order to set up an obligatory sequel. But I will say, while the story of the game is entertaining on its own, that doesn't mean that Gearbox was done with their game after the story was over, because this is when DLC was starting to hit its all-time high, and Gearbox was fully intent on taking advantage of it. For one, they made 4 expansions for Borderlands, each one increasing the level cap for the game, as well as providing more hours of fun for players to enjoy. The first DLC released only 2 months after the original game dropped, this being the zombie island of Dr. Ned. It takes us to a small island on Pandora, named Jacob's Cove, where players meet the evil twin of Dr. Zed, Dr. Ned. Very creative. After finding out that the island is under attack from all manners of monsters, the protagonists work with Dr. Ned to take out the monsters and cure the town of Jacob's Cove. The DLC is filled to the brim with all manners of missions and quests for players to deal with, including undead enemies. Once they make it to the end, you'll find out that Dr. Ned was behind the whole thing, and players will have to fight him to the death, twice, even though the credits for the game start to roll. This is where Borderlands' silly humor shines, and this is only the beginning, as Borderlands 2 will start to lean into the more wacky comedy of the series. Regardless, the DLC introduced more content for players to enjoy, and at only $10 a pop, it was a sizable DLC that gave tons more hours of fun to the players. Then, Gearbox released the second DLC for the game, Mad Moxxi's Underdome Riot. This DLC does things differently, working the plot of the DLC into a new game mode for players to enjoy. This mode being a PvE co-op mode. Although the whole game is a PvE mode, this one turns Borderlands into a round-based arena shooter. As for what plot was worked into the game, meet this chick. Her name's Moxxi, and she's been through 3 husbands. But instead of just throwing herself into the hedonistic lifestyle of a Tinder OnlyFans model, she's decided to host an Underdome. Yes, that's a reference to Thunderdome. Borderlands is going to do way more of these. Now, it's up to the protagonists to fight the enemies for this femme fatale's amusement, at least until the thrill is gone. This DLC has some very questionable design choices, a lack of quests, explorable areas, and the fact that you don't get any XP for killing enemies sticking out like a sore thumb. This DLC was also priced at $10, and was one of the more lackluster expansions for the game. But players itching for a more traditional Borderlands experience wouldn't have to wait much longer, as only 2 months later the next DLC came. The third entry in the Borderlands post-launch content was the Secret Army of General Knox. The DLC has players driving from place to place, meeting familiar faces, and going up against the Crimson Lance once more, all led by General Knox. After a lot of boring driving, like a lot, players make it to the vault to take on General Knox, who was just about to kill himself due to the promotion system in the Crimson Lance promoting a literal toddler instead of Knox. Then, the Vault Hunters show up, and Knox decides he'll fight them in combat. Once he's defeated and finally dead, the players get 3 minutes to loot as many weapons as possible before the armory explodes. After completing the final mission in the DLC, you also unlock a secret boss. Cromarax the Invincible is the first repeatable raid boss in the Borderlands series, where you take on a gigantic, massively strong opponent in order to get your hands on some of the strongest drops the game has to offer. He's a massive challenge to take out, even in a 4-player party, as his level will always scale 4 levels higher than that of the highest player. This DLC is also $10 and is one of the biggest DLCs for Borderlands. And then came the final DLC for Borderlands, Claptrap's new robot revolution. After the end of the game, if players wait until after the credits, they can see a Claptrap get struck by lightning. The lightning changes Claptrap into an interplanetary ninja assassin, which sends him on a quest to destroy humanity for its mistreatment of his same-sized rust buckets of nuts and bolts. Players take on enemies converted to Claptrap's cause, and even have refights with bosses from the main game, all under control of Claptrap, including a resurrected General Knox who we fight for a 3rd time at this point. With that, this covers all of Borderlands, the game that single-handedly brought the term looter shooter into the mainstream and set off a chain reaction that would change the way that RPGs worked in the gaming world, including RPGs like Far Cry, Fallout, and even more so the rest of the FPS RPG genre. Hey there, thanks so much for watching to the end of this video. If you enjoyed, leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, as I have 194 more videos scheduled for release between now and the inevitable heat death of the universe. You'll have to forgive my barebones editing on this one, as I literally don't have an active internet connection right now. Follow me on Twitter and Twitch, and join the Discord. I upload every single week, except when I don't. As always, I wish you all the best. Auf Wiedersehen. and I've got a more recent, more boring looter shooter to review. That's right, it's Outriders.